The Vikings swept across Europe like a storm, burning towns, toppling kingdoms, and crushing anyone in their path. No one could stop them until one army met its match. It wasn't defeated by a king. It was stopped by a woman. She was a widow, turned warrior, fortress builder, and strategist. And her weapons, boiling beer, angry bees, even some say buckets of urine. Her strange tactics broke the fiercest raiders of the age, and this unlikely leader laid the foundations of England itself. Chapter 1. The Viking Scourge. When the Vikings first struck the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793, it sent shockwaves across Christendom. Here, at a place thought safe and sacred, longships landed, monks were cut down, and holy treasures stolen. It wasn't just the brutality of the raid, it was the message. Nowhere was beyond their reach. For decades after, the Vikings came as raiders, swift and terrifying. They descended on coasts and rivers, plundering towns before vanishing back to sea. But in time, they became more than raiders. They became settlers. They carved out permanent footholds across northern and eastern England, a region that came to be called the Danelaw. It was a new kind of conquest, less about a raid, more about replacing whole kingdoms. In 865, the so-called Great Heathen Army arrived, the largest Viking force yet to land in England. They overwhelmed kingdom after kingdom. Northumbria fell, East Anglia fell, half of Mercia fell. For the Anglo-Saxons, it seemed the end of their world had come. Only Wessex still held out. That survival came down to one man, Alfred the Great. In 878, against the odds, Alfred's forces defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Edington, forcing a fragile peace. But peace did not mean unity. The map of England was split in two, Viking-ruled lands in the north and east, and Anglo-Saxon kingdoms clinging to the south and west. It was into this divided world, one half Viking, one half Anglo-Saxon, that Alfred's daughter stepped. She had grown up in the shadow of invasion, surrounded by war, and steeped in the lessons of survival. Her name was Aethelflaed. In time, she would prove herself every bit her father's heir, not only defending what remained, but striking fear into the very Vikings who once seemed unstoppable. Chapter 2. Aethelflaed's Rise. Æthelflæd was born around the year 870, the eldest daughter of Alfred the Great and his queen Alswith. She grew up in an England under siege, her earliest memories shaped by Viking invasions, her father's desperate battles, and the fragile survival of Wessex. Unlike most noble daughters, she was not raised in a time of stability or luxury. Her childhood was war, and she absorbed its lessons. As part of her father's strategy, Aethelflaed was married to Ethelred, the ruler of Mercia. This was no ordinary alliance. Mercia stretched from London and Gloucester up to Chester and Lincoln. It formed the buffer state between Alfred's Wessex in the south and the Viking Danelaw in the north. Their marriage was not just about dynastic politics, it was survival. Together, they represented the front line against Viking expansion. For years, Ethelred and Aethelflaed ruled side by side. But as his health declined, it was Aethelflaed who increasingly took command. She organized defenses, advised on strategy, and gradually became the true power in Mercia. Then, in 911, Ethelred died. In an age when women were expected to weave peace, not wage war, what Aethelflaed did next was extraordinary. She did not step aside, nor did she hand authority to her brother Edward, King of Wessex. Instead, she assumed full leadership. She was proclaimed Lady of the Mercians, the only woman ever to rule an Anglo-Saxon kingdom in her own right. Æthelflæd was, in many ways, an Anglo-Saxon Boadicea. Like the legendary warrior queen before her, she was a widow who turned grief into power, a woman who commanded armies, built fortresses, and bent a kingdom to her will. The chroniclers remembered her not as a regent or a placeholder, but as a ruler. Her people followed her into battle. Her enemies feared her name, and her reign would prove that she was far more than Alfred's daughter or Æthelred's wife. She was a leader forged in fire, a shieldmaiden who would change the fate of England. Chapter 3: Fortress Builder and Campaigner. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a yearly newspaper set up by her father, gives us a glimpse of Æthelflæd's relentless drive. In the year 913, it records, "By the grace of God, Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians, went with all the Mercians to Tamworth and built the fortress there in early summer, and before the beginning of August, the one in Stafford." This was not a one-off effort. It was part of a systematic campaign, one that she carried out alongside her brother Edward, King of Wessex. Together, they pushed the Danes northwards, driving them back to the River Humber. With each step forward, they regained East Anglia and central England. And with each gain, they secured it not by words on a treaty, but with walls of stone and timber. Æthelflæd's genius was not only in battle, but in building. She understood what her father, Alfred the Great, had begun, that the future of England depended on burhs, fortified towns that were at once military garrisons and seeds of commerce. She built 10 of them in her reign, at a rate of nearly 2 a year: Chester, Stafford, Warwick, Runcorn, and more, each one placed with a soldier's eye for defense and a ruler's eye for prosperity. These burhs were not just castles, they were anchors, rising on rivers, guarding trade routes, overlooking borders. They became the skeleton of a New England, where once a wooden palisade stood against Vikings. Towns would later grow, markets would thrive, and cathedrals would rise. Her campaigns were measured, deliberate, and unstoppable. In 917, she captured the Viking stronghold of Derby, a brutal fight that cost the lives of many of her loyal thanes. In 918, she pressed further, taking Leicester, another pillar of Viking control. Step by step, she advanced, her armies fighting hard, her fortresses holding firm. It was strategy as much as strength, military grit welded to infrastructure. And with each fortress raised, Aethelflaed carved out the future of England. Chapter 4: The Siege of Chester. Not long after her fortress building began, Æthelflæd faced one of her greatest tests. The threat came from a Viking leader named Ingimund. Once a powerful warlord in Dublin, he had been exiled by rival Norse factions. Seeking a new base, he turned to Æthelflæd and requested land near Chester. Ever watchful, she granted his plea, believing a contained threat was better than an unseen enemy. Her pragmatism, however, would be tested. Ingimund, his resentment simmering, secretly rallied disaffected Vikings from across the Isles. Whispers turned to gatherings, skirmishes to organized marches. What descended upon Chester was not a raiding party, but a vast, vengeful coalition, their numbers like the rising tide. When the siege began on this keystone of Mercian defense, Æthelflæd herself took command. Her leadership was not symbolic. She was the strategist, the heartbeat of the city's defense. The fighting was brutal, and the Vikings came prepared for a long struggle. They were confident in their numbers and their reputation, and pressed their attack relentlessly. Yet time and again, she turned their strength against them. First came the ambush. Mercian defenders staged a feigned retreat, luring the Vikings into Chester's narrow streets. There, hidden soldiers struck from doorways and rooftops, slaughtering them in the choke points. Then, the trick negotiations. According to later accounts, some Danes were deceived into laying down their arms under a false promise of peace, only to be cut down or crushed by a rain of stones hurled from the walls above. But the most infamous defenses were those that mocked the Viking sense of superiority. As the attackers tunneled under Chester's walls with wooden shelters, the defenders poured down scalding liquids, boiling water, ale, and, some say, even urine, turning the tunnels into steaming death traps. Finally, in one of the strangest and most effective weapons of the age, they hurled hives of bees over the battlements. Swarms erupted among the besiegers, stinging men and animals alike, sending panic through their lines. What began as a confident assault dissolved into chaos. Ingimund's great coalition broke, its warriors fleeing in disorder, its ambition shattered. Chester stood firm. This episode was not an isolated drama, but part of Æthelflæd's larger strategy. The defense of Chester was a statement. The Mercians would not yield, their fortresses would hold, and every attempt to undermine them would be turned into ruin. In the broader struggle against the Danes, Chester was proof that her burr system worked, that a network of fortified towns, led with intelligence and ferocity, could resist even the fiercest Viking onslaught. Aethelflaed had turned what should have been her downfall into a legend, reinforcing her reputation not only as a builder of towns, but as a commander who could outwit and outfight the very scourge of her age. Chapter 5. Legacy. In 918, Æthelflæd's remarkable life came to an end. She died at Tamworth, the very heart of Mercia, at a time when her reputation was at its height. She was remembered in two roles that rarely coexisted: peace weaver and shieldmaiden, a high-born woman who brokered alliances, but also a warrior who led armies into battle. Her death did not erase her memory. In fact, Aethelflaed was celebrated as a folk hero in her own lifetime. The Irish annals of Ulster recorded her passing with reverence, calling her a most famous queen of the Saxons. That a foreign chronicle praised her so highly speaks volumes, showing how far her influence and fame reached. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle, compiled by her own people, likewise recorded her campaigns and fortresses, though often in the terse, matter-of-fact style of the age. These records are not lavish praise, but they give us the bones of her story, evidence of her building, her victories, and her leadership. From these fragments, a powerful image emerges. Her brother, King Edward of Wessex, respected her deeply. He entrusted his son, the young Athelstan, to her court. There, under Æthelflæd's watchful eye, the boy learned more than reading or swordplay. He absorbed lessons in fortress building, military strategy, and statecraft, the very skills that would later allow him to unite England. Athelstan would become the first true king of all England, but it was his aunt who gave him the foundation. Æthelflæd's legacy was not merely military, it was structural, political, and cultural. Her burghs became the framework of English towns, her campaigns secured the heartland, and her leadership showed that even in a warrior age, power could wear a woman's face. This is Long History Short, your shortcut to the whole story. On our channel, Long History Short, we want to continue to bring stories that are worth the listen and help not only educate, but entertain a bit too. If you have any suggestions for stories you'd like to hear, we would love to know. Leave a comment, let us know. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe.